How about
right.
GDP, JP?
So we have several problem sets to go over today. Before we do anything else, we're going to go through, it's 5 through 8. And
Okay, USD CAD is looking like it's about to go up for 1 minute. Okay, we're gonna buy 1 minute.
Anyway, so then when we're done with that, we can get back to chapter 11. Now, I have posted in Moodle. Let's go take a look at it real fast. All right, so if you go to our class in Moodle, you'll see that down here at the end, we have chapters 5, the problem sets 5, 6, 7, and 8. Oh, I see what happened. I did not post it. I wrote a chapter 9 problem set. But it doesn't seem to be here, so I'll take care of that right now. All right, that's pretty annoying. Okay, so the bottom line here is, let's remind ourselves what's going on here. Chapters 5 through 9 will represent the second midterm, which is imminent. And so we need to go over all these problem sets. There's also going to be a sample midterm number 2, which I will have ready in a day or so, maybe tomorrow. And so what I would like to do ideally is go over both the chapter 9 problem set and the sample midterm next Monday. But like I said, the sample midterm number 2 is not completely ready. I'll try to finish that up by tonight or tomorrow. And then we'll review it on Monday. And then you can actually take the second midterm. And as usual, you'll have about a week to do it. And again, it's on 5 through 9. And then that way, the final exam will be on the last 3 or 4 chapters that we'll be covering, starting with chapter 10, all right, which is our discussion about financial markets and money and the Federal Reserve System, which is a pretty significant chunk of the course. But at the same time, though, it will not be comprehensive. So in other words, the final exam is only based on the last few chapters, which we'll figure out next week. Right now, why don't we focus our attention on these problem sets? None of them are terribly long. Oh, absolutely. As soon as we're done, I'll be posting all the answers. Yes, that way you'll have something to study with. Yeah, I wouldn't just leave you without the answers. Yes, they'll be all set by the time we're done tonight. Maybe I'll post them all. And so if we finish this, well, I don't think this will take the whole class. Then we can get back to chapter 11, which is our discussion about money. Okay, what could be more exciting than money? I would say nothing. So, all right, anyway, let's get these open and let's take a look at them. So first, let's get back to chapter 5. All right, so what are we doing in this chapter? First, let me save this with the proper name. So we've got a small economy. All they make is coffee and milk. Well, they're in pretty good shape, I must say. If that's all they have to choose from, it could be worse. Okay, what if the only goods they made were beets and lima beans? Boy, they'd be in trouble, wouldn't they? Yes, they would. Okay, so anyway, what are we being asked to do here? First of all, it mentions that 2019 is the base year. That's an important detail. You'll see why in a minute. So we're being asked to do 4 things: the nominal GDP, real GDP for both years. Now, just in general, GDP is the dollar value of all the goods and services we produce during a given year. And that's what we'll be doing here. But what matters a great deal is whether or not we're using current prices or base year prices. Okay, the quantities always come from the current year, but the prices can come from either the current year if we're using nominal GDP, or from the base year if we're looking at real GDP. So for part A, what we're going to do is multiply out the price of the coffee times the quantity that we're producing. So you can write it out as the 2019 quantity of coffee. Now, by the way, you don't have to write out all these details. I'm just doing this to show you what we're doing. Then we'll fill in the numbers. So then we'll do the same thing for the milk. So in other words, it's always the price times the quantity. The order doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter if it's quantity times milk, price times quantity. So we'll have 8 pounds, 2,000 pounds of coffee times $8 for the coffee. Then we'll have 5,000 gallons of milk times $2 per gallon. And so that's going to give us 16,000 plus 10,000 equals $26,000. So in other words, the nominal GDP in 2019 is $26,000. Now, part B is actually easy because in part B, we know that since 2019 is the base year, 2019 real GDP is computed with 2019 prices. In other words, in the base year, nominal GDP equals real GDP. So we don't really have to do anything except to change the title. It's going to be exactly the same thing. So this is the only year in which this is true, though, by the way. So 2019 real GDP, we're doing exactly the same thing, and we come up with $26,000. All right, so that's easy. Then it gets a little trickier when we move into 2020. What about nominal GDP? So first I'm going to split the screen so I can see the chart as we go along. That's right. So in 2020, the nominal GDP is the 2020 quantity of coffee times the 2020 price of coffee plus the 2020 quantity of milk times the 2020 price of milk, which equals, so we go over to the last two columns. In 2020, we made 2,500 pounds of coffee at $9 each, plus we produced 5,500 gallons of milk at $2.20 each. So 250 or 2,500 times 9 is $22,500 plus 5,500 gallons of milk times 2.2 is $12,100. So when you add those together, you get $34,600 for your GDP, nominal GDP, $34,600. Now this time, though, the real GDP will actually be different than the nominal, and here's why. Because 2020 real GDP, we're keeping the quantities, but we're using the base year prices. So you can see for the coffee, for example, we're using the current quantity. We always use the current quantity, but the price is coming from the base year. So we'll have 2020 quantity of coffee times the 2019 price plus the 2020 quantity of milk times the 2019 price. So in 2020, again, we produced 2,500 pounds of coffee, but now we're using the $8 price from 2019. Then the milk, 5,500 gallons, is multiplied by the $2 price from 2019. So we're going to have 20,000 plus 11,000 equals 31,000. Well, that's how, because by holding the prices constant, that guarantees that what we're seeing here is the actual increase in output compared to the base year. In the nominal case, we don't know how much of that output increase is inflation. But here we know that there's no inflation involved because we're keeping the prices fixed. So any increase in GDP, like here, for example, real GDP went from 26,000 to 31,000. That means that all 5,000 of that is a result of more output. And you can see we made 500 more pounds of coffee and 500 more gallons of milk. So therefore, real GDP had to go up, but nominal went up even faster because prices also rose. So if you looked at the comparison between the two nominal GDPs, you would get a deceptive view of how much output we've really produced. By holding the constant prices, then we're just focusing exclusively on the value of the output. And that's why real is so much more useful than nominal. All right. Now, this is an interesting one. Remember, what is this all about? The expenditures approach to GDP. Y equals C plus I plus G plus NX, as opposed to the incomes approach, which is kind of a mess. You'll notice that not all of these items are needed to do this. Okay, I mean, it's not exactly a trick question, but if you were also asked to do the incomes approach, I guess you could do it, but we're going to stick with the expenditures approach just because it is so much simpler. Okay, so C is right here. I is this amount, investment. G, government purchases, or expenditures, I should say, are 1,000. And then the net exports are minus 500. When you add those up, you get 5,100. That's 5,100 billion, that is. And that's all you have to do. It's that simple. Okay, so you can ignore the other numbers that we don't need. For example, rent, profit, interest, depreciation. These are things that are only used for the incomes approach to this. Here we're being asked for the expenditures approach, so this is the formula that we'll use. Okay, well, that one's done. See, none of these are terribly long, but there's a lot of them. Okay, a lot of chapters on this section. So let's take a look at 6 now. Hopefully you'll get that answer. Next week, next Monday. It isn't ready yet, though. I haven't quite gotten around to finishing. The second sample midterm is not quite ready yet, but when I post it, which should be tonight or tomorrow at the latest, you'll have the whole weekend to go over it, and then we'll do it on Monday. All right, so let's do 6. Okay, you're welcome. Number 6, what's going on here? So we've got, let's assume that the US population is 300 million, of which the working age population is 200 million. Those are the people who are potentially available for work, of which 125 million are employed and another 15 million are unemployed. So what exactly is going on with that labor force? So the labor force can be thought of very simply in part A, total employed plus total unemployed. So this is 125 million plus 15 million So the labor force is 140 million. These are all the people who are either working, or at least if they're not working, they're potentially available for work. So it excludes people who are not looking for work. It also excludes people who are not eligible for work. So we only want to count the people who are either currently working or else potentially could become available if a job became available. The unemployment rate is very simply the total unemployed over the labor force. Okay, so that means you've got 15 million unemployed over the labor force, which is, we just got through showing, is 140 million. So 15 out of 140 is 0.107, which is 10.7%. C, what is the employment to population ratio? The employment to population ratio, which you don't hear about very often in the press, but it is one of the many measures that the government uses, and that's total employed divided by the working age population. So that means 125 million over 200 million. And that ratio is equal to 0.625, which is 62.5%. I don't think economists find that number to be nearly as useful as the others, but we do see it reported. And then finally, the labor force participation rate equals size of the labor force, or just the labor force, divided by the working age population. And that's going to be 125 million. Oh, sorry, no, 140 million divided by 200 million, which is 0.7 or 70%. So that basically tells us what proportion of the working age population is making itself available for work. Okay, so now, of course, a lot of people are not in the labor force because they're going to school full time, for example. But there are other people who've simply given up looking for work as well. The discouraged labor workers, they're not considered to be part of the labor force, but they are part of the working age population. All right, now, how about some of these? These are, of course, short answer questions. What is one requirement for being counted as unemployed? All right, so officially, there's 3 things that they look for. So you can just give me one, but there's actually 3. So I'll list them all. Obviously, you don't have a job. Has actively looked for work. During the previous 4 weeks. Now that, I don't know where that comes from, 4 weeks. It's an arbitrary cutoff point. I guess they figure if you haven't bothered to look for a job in over a month, then you're not serious about finding one. Okay. And is currently available for work. In other words, if a job came along, you could accept it. You're not, for example, in the hospital, you're not in jail, you're not in the military, you're available. If a job became open, you could take it. Now, what is the minimum age at which you are considered to be part of the working age population? Strangely enough, it's 16. I think the reason for that is because I believe that you can actually legally drop out of high school at 16 without anyone's permission. I think that's what this is all about. You would think it would be 18, but no, I guess some people do exactly that. They drop out and they go to work. Okay. Now, how does the BLS, oh, and by the way, this is the Bureau of Labor Statistics, who keeps track of all this information. Now, how do they decide who's part of the labor force? In other words, it represents basically is the total number of people who either have jobs or are, or sorry, or do not have jobs, but are available for work.
They don't have to have looked.
Well, right. I think the words available imply that they've been looking. Yeah, that's a good point. Available, they're considered, if you haven't looked for 4 weeks or more, that means technically you're not available. You're not interested in working. And it's kind of a gray area here, but this is how they formally define it. I guess what they really mean is then, of course, you have to have actively look for work if you don't have a job. Anything beyond that, if you've been waiting around and haven't looked, then you're not technically available, or at least they don't consider you to be available for work. So, yes, they can get a little gray area-ish around some of these definitions. But anyway, are retirees part of the labor force? No, they're enjoying themselves too much. Why would they work if they're retired? Why would you give that up? If you can afford to retire, oh man, what a lifetime that would be. You can do whatever you want all day long and never have to worry about money. I think we'd all like to be in that boat, but you typically have to wait till you're getting along there in years before you can reach that point. If you do, some people never retire because they don't want to be retired. You do get that too. Some people feel like they have to stay busy to be happy. And so they actually keep working even when it's not necessary. But a lot of people, no, their dream is to be on the beach all day long or whatever. But anyway, if the working age population is 200 million and the labor force is 160 million, with 6 million unemployed people, so the unemployment rate would then be, it's going to be the number of people who are unemployed divided by the labor force, size of the labor force. Not the population, but the labor force. And so therefore, you get 6 million over 160 million, which works out to be 0.0375, 3.75%. Not bad. That's an excellent unemployment rate. All right, so you can see some of these are actually overlapping a little bit with what we did earlier. The labor force participation rate is labor force over working age population. And you can, in the slides, we multiply this by 100 to turn it into percentage. That's not absolutely necessary, but I'll put it in here anyway. It's understood that this is a percentage anyway. So you can put in 100 if you want. I wouldn't take off any points if you don't put that there. Now, here's an interesting one. What does that mean to be a discouraged worker? Ooh, now this is a tricky one. They define this as, this is someone who does not have a job. Now remember, this is discouraged. This is not somebody who's completely given up, but who does not have a job, but would like one. In other words, they would take a job if they could. But see, now has not actively sought work for over 4 weeks. So that's how they're suddenly not part of the labor force anymore. That 4 weeks part. Here we go. But has sought work, so within 12 months. So they haven't completely given up, but they're getting close. Okay, so in other words, they're sort of like trying to figure out what to do with themselves. But at the moment, they're not actively out there in the job market looking, or they haven't been for several weeks, but they've looked at least once in the last 12 months. So they're getting very close to dropping out of the workforce, but it hasn't quite reached that point yet. They're discouraged, which means they could be brought back into the workforce if the right job comes along. So marginally attached. In fact, why don't we go back to this chapter for a second? Because that's unemployed. There's the discouraged worker, but marginally attached include discouraged workers plus those who have given other reasons besides a lack of jobs for their failure to seek work in the prior 4 weeks. In other words, there's something else going on with them. And maybe their skills are lacking or something else is going on, but this is even more, this is beyond people who are giving up because they can't find a job. These are people who may have other reasons why they can't work. So those are marginally attached, and they're not considered to be part of the labor force, because they're, in principle, if a job came along, they might not take it. So this is just no. All right, now you might recall the Bureau of Labor Statistics actually has 6 different versions of unemployment. The one that, though, is considered to be the quote official rate is U3. That's the one you see talked about in the press. This is what policymakers are basing their decisions on, but there do exist others, because obviously the word unemployment can mean a lot of different things. And so in recognition of that, the BLS has 6 of them, ranging from the one where almost nobody is considered to be unemployed. Well, what they actually do, let's go back and revisit these real fast. U1 means only people who've been out of work for at least 15 weeks count as unemployed. So it's hard to be counted as unemployed in this definition. Okay, these are ones who lost their jobs, but also who have completed temporary jobs. Then it goes up to U3, unemployed over the labor force. U4, unemployed, is to which we add the discouraged workers. So this is a broader measure of unemployment. Then we add back the marginally attached workers to get to U5. And then U6 includes everyone, including involuntary part-time workers, people who work part-time, only not by choice, because they'd rather work full-time and they can't find anything. So those are the 6 measures. U3 is the official one. The broadest measure would be U6 because it includes more people in it, in each category. All right, now, what about these measures of unemployment? Frictional, structural, and cyclical. Frictional, this refers to people who are temporarily between jobs. Now, I'm not sure exactly, I guess that, they recognize that it takes time to find a new job when you lose your old one. So if you're out there actively looking for work, or something's happening, or you're just actively seeking work, you're considered to be frictionally unemployed because your unemployment is due to the inefficiencies in the job market. It just takes time to match you up with another employer. Structural is completely different. With structural unemployment, this refers to people who are unemployed. And these are the people who don't necessarily have the right skill set to get a job in the current market. For example, they have a lack of skills, marketable skills. May have very little education. That's another possibility. Imagine somebody who did drop out of high school at 16. Now here they are 40 something years old, and they're still drifting around between low skill jobs. They may have a very difficult time finding something if the economy slows down. And then maybe have skills that have become obsolete. et cetera. In other words, these are people who need training or something to get them back into the job market. It's not to do with, inefficiencies in the labor market. It's not to do with the business cycle. It's just because they simply don't have a lot of valuable experience, let's say, or a lot of education. So sadly enough, I mean, they're going to stay like that forever until they find some way to get more training or more skills or something that makes them more marketable. Anyway, so yeah, and that's a big problem. Sometimes with trade, you find that industries disappear and then suddenly people who've done one thing all their lives need to do something else. It's not going to be easy for them. So the government needs to approach that a little differently than cyclical unemployment. These are people, or this refers to unemployment that is due to the business cycle. There's people who have good skills and they're looking for work and all, but let's say there's a recession and their jobs disappeared and now they have to find something else. All right, and then finally, what is the natural rate of unemployment? This is the unemployment rate that would exist if there was no cyclical unemployment. So in other words, once you reach the point where there's no longer any cyclical unemployment, whatever's left must consist of structural and frictional unemployment. That point that we've reached is called the natural rate. Although we don't get there very often, it's still defined as the natural rate of unemployment. All right, that I believe is it for number 6. Now we're ready for 7. Okay, this is the one that's based on inflation. All right. So now we're going to talk about inflation for this chapter. Okay, so what's going on here? Now, if you notice, the BLS is responsible for keeping track of labor statistics, but also inflation or price information. They're the ones who determine the value of the CPI. What are 3 of the categories? Now, again, this is one of those cases where there were quite a few of them listed in the slides. And we actually looked at the actual data from the BLS when we were going over this material. There actually are, there's actually 8 categories. So you only need 3 of them, but I'm going to list them anyway. They break it up into food and beverages, housing, apparel, transportation, medical services, recreation, education, and communication. I guess they figure that covers everything. I guess over the years they've refined their measurements. And so they finally decided these are the categories that make the most sense. I mean, in principle, you could have any categories you want. But as far as they're concerned, these are the ones that accurately reflect what people buy on a regular basis. And, you start to wonder, like, for example, where would you put iPhones? I guess that would be communication, wouldn't you think? Or how about I don't know, how about iPads? That could be considered a lot of things, but possibly recreation if you're just having fun with it. So, you get these gray areas, of course, but this is the system that they use at the moment, although they're constantly doing research on how to better improve the CPI itself because they know that it's obviously got a lot of issues. What is the base year? Now, this is kind of odd. During that period between 82 and 84, prices were extremely stable. So what they're essentially doing is constructing what amounts to an average of that period and setting that equal to 100. What had happened was just prior to these 3 or 4 years, there had been a lot of inflation in the US in the late 70s, which finally was eliminated by around 82. And starting from that point, prices have been very, very stable in the United States. And so they figured this would be a good starting point. The only problem is, of course, the information from 82 to 84 starts to get a little outdated after a while. But at the moment, they don't appear to have any plans to change the base year. Previously, though, it had been, I remember they had changed it. It started out many, many years ago. The base year was 1967. And then eventually it got switched to 1977. And then they went to 82, 84, and they haven't changed it since then. I think their thinking is that it could be very disruptive if they suddenly start changing the base year, because then all of a sudden, all the calculations have to be updated. And so I think that they would like to keep it there as long as possible. But anyway, by definition, the base year CPI is 100. Okay, that's the starting point. That's the benchmark against which all the future years are based. So it's easy to figure out what the inflation rate is in a given year compared to the CPI in the base year or else from a previous year. Now, also because of the way the CPI is constructed, obviously when prices go up, the CPI goes up. So that means that, or that implies that in years prior to the base year, CPI would be less than 100. Yes, pretty much that's what it is, because it's such a stable period. They decided to average it all out and come up with a single number that represents that entire period. They'll set that equal to 100, and since then, every year after that will be something higher than 100, assuming the prices went up. So in other words, what I'm about to show you here, the CPI is less than 100 in years prior to the base year, assuming that prices have gone up or go up every year. Now, that is usually the case. It's extremely unusual that prices go down for any length of time. The last time we had prices going down in the US was during the Depression. So that shows you. So we're on pretty solid ground here saying that CPI will be less than 100 in years prior to the base year, because we did not experience any deflation during these last 40 some odd years. Now, afterwards though, CPI is greater than 100 in years after the base year, again, assuming that prices are going up. And of course, it's equal to 100 exactly in the actual base year. All right, now we'll look at this one, inflation. So we know that CPI is used by the BLS to calculate the rate of inflation, or at least the rate of consumer inflation. So how would that work? 2020 inflation would equal the percentage change in the CPI from 2020 to 19 to 2020. So because they're telling us that the 2020 CPI is 262, after having been 250 the year before, and so that works out to be approximately 0.048 or 4.8%. And that's how it's done. They literally just calculate the percentage change in the CPI from one year to the next. That's how it's done. So when you hear in the news that the inflation rate was 2%, what they're really saying is that CPI went up 2% during that year. All right, so here we once again, we have one of these cases where we have many different drawbacks to the CPI, but it's only asking for two, but I'll mention them all anyway, or at least most of the important ones. The CPI does not measure all goods available to consumers. In other words, they've created a market basket, which they don't change very often. What they change is the weights, but not the goods themselves. They typically keep it fixed for long periods of time. not every single item that you buy or can buy is measured by the CPI. It leaves certain things out, especially products that have been developed in recent years. So it doesn't capture all the goods that we might buy. The CPI does not capture the impact of new goods. In other words, the market basket does not contain iPhones because they weren't invented during the base year. The CPI cannot capture the benefit of quality improvements. Oops. In other words, if you're buying a product that's of a higher quality than it used to be, even if the price is the same, you're still better off than you were, but the CPI can't really reflect that. All it can do is show the actual prices in the market, regardless of whether they refer to a product of similar quality. So the unfortunate thing is that you're starting to compare apples with oranges by the inability to really and truly take into account quality improvements. The CPI cannot capture the benefits or the cost savings that result when consumers switch from more expensive goods to cheaper goods. In other words, if prices are rising, let's say that all of a sudden pork becomes horribly expensive for some reason, a lot of people will switch to beef or to fish or whatever the case may be. And so the CPI is essentially using fixed weights that do not reflect shifts back and forth between different products that people use to save money. So it's missing an important detail, the fact that we can save money by switching back and forth between goods that are more expensive and goods that have become less expensive. And in fact, the name for this is the substitution bias. So in other words, the substitution bias associated with the CPI does not reflect changes in consumption when consumers switch from expensive products to cheaper products. This artificially increases the CPI compared with the actual cost of living. So that is a problem. And so it means, again, all of these problems result in the CPI overstating the true cost of living. Okay, now it's not a huge amount. They think that the government economists think that it's only off by about 0.1%. Like, for example, if it says 2%, it might really be 1.9. So it's not a huge difference, but it's enough to matter if, let's say, contracts are being based on CPI, or if Social Security payments are based on CPI, which they are. It can end up costing a lot of money if they're off even by 0.1%. So they're working on it, though. They're constantly coming up with new ideas for improving the CPI. Now here, a real price is adjusted for inflation, while a nominal price is not. It's just that simple. All right, and then if a bank pays 5% rate of interest, when the inflation rate is 1%, the real rate equals the nominal rate minus the inflation rate, which means 5% minus 1% is 4%. Now, this is only an approximation, but it's a very good one. So we can just think in general terms of the real rate as being the nominal rate minus the inflation rate. All right. Now, unfortunately, there's a problem with this next question. Not the question itself, but there's an issue with the example in the slides. So here's what we're going to do. I'll tell you what, let's just toss this one. I'll go over it with you next time. What's wrong with the example in the slides? So let's just say that this one is out as a potential problem on the exam. I'll go through it with you later on. I noticed later on that there was a problem with this example, so we'll just discard this one for now. All right. Well, now it's ready for number 8. Nice. All right, number 8. And then when that's done, we can finally get back to the notes, which I know you're dying to see because it's all about money. Nothing is more exciting than money. All right, let's try this one. 8. Now, chapter 8 is about potential GDP and productivity. All right, so let's see what we're doing here. So potential GDP is the level of GDP at which all factors of production, meaning land, labor, and capital, entrepreneurship, are being used as efficiently as possible. The production function is a mathematical relationship between the quantity of labor employed with all fixed resources and the amount of output that is produced. It's basically an equation that shows you how much output we can get for different levels of labor. All right, now law of diminishing returns. As more resources are used, with fixed factors of production, at first, output increases at an increasing rate. Output then increases at a decreasing rate. Output reaches its maximum value and then declines continuously. Now, we saw that with the total product curve. If you want to remember what that looks like, so in other words, initially the output grows very quickly. It reaches some critical point. Let's call this increasing. All right, let's try that again. In this range, the output is increasing at an increasing rate. Then it increases at a decreasing rate. Hold on one second. And then right about here where it peaks out, from in this range, TP increases. Total product, by the way, at a decreasing rate. Then output reaches its maximum value. And then, of course, down here, output is actually decreasing. And that's an illustration of the law of diminishing returns. All right, so you've seen this before, but I just want to remind you, this is how it works. And it's, of course, the fact that we have some fixed resources that's causing this to happen. If we could increase everything, including labor, then we wouldn't have this problem. We could buy more equipment, we could expand the size of our operations, but in the short run, which is what this reflects, this is what we would expect to see. All right, the total product curve then, of course, when technology improves, output, the entire output, total product curve shifts up to reflect more output being produced with the same resources. Okay, in other words, the whole thing just moves up because we can make more than we could previously with the same resources, same labor, same capital, same everything. I'll call this TP1. And TP2 to indicate that the curve shifts upward when we have higher technology. Now, as far as this curve is concerned, points on the curve represent, these are points of maximum efficiency. Okay. Points below the curve, these are points at which resources are being wasted. Okay. And above, we'd say that the points above the TP curve are unattainable with current technology and resources. Okay, I mean, we'd like to be up there, we can't reach it. Now, the demand curve for labor is downward sloping because of the simple reason that labor has a price, the wage. So as wages rise, the quantity demanded of labor falls and vice versa. It's just that simple. The supply curve, why is that upward sloping? Well, because as wages rise, workers are willing to work more hours, Why wouldn't they? The better the wages, the more you want to work. It's just that simple. If the demand for labor increases, then the equilibrium, just like the demand for anything, the equilibrium wage rises. On the other hand, if the supply increases, then the opposite would happen. All right, and it's very simple. We'll call it LD for labor demand, labor supply. If the demand increases, the wage rate has to go up. All right, that's a result of a higher labor demand. In other words, there's some reason why companies are willing to pay. It may be that this is caused by higher productivity. In fact, that's often what drives employment, is productivity. But if the supply drops, let's say that in some countries, like in Western Europe, the people coming into the job market may not be enough to replace people who are retiring. So the supply of labor in some of these countries is actually shrinking. So this can happen too. So with fewer people in the job market, that means wages have to go up. Okay, now here we're looking at the theories. What is one of the most important assumptions on which classical economics is based? Markets are self-correcting. In other words, there's no real need for government to get involved. Markets will take care of any problems that arise. The school that calls for government intervention, the other extreme, would be the Keynesian school, where they basically thought the government should be constantly butting into the economy. And then the third one that we looked at, the monetarist school, is the one that attributes everything to changes in the money supply, including the business cycle. All right, and then full employment is occurs when there is no cyclical unemployment. So it's really just another name for the natural unemployment rate. In other words, when nobody's out of work because of the business cycle, then we're at, quote, full employment. Okay, so that would be it for 8. So like I said, 9, I just posted it yesterday, so you didn't have time to look at it. And the sample midterm isn't quite ready yet either, so we'll do those on Monday. In the meantime, though, we're going to get back to our discussion about money, a very exciting chapter. Now, it turns out that I created a very brief presentation which contains some very interesting forms of money that have been used throughout history, both in the United States and the rest of the world. So I'd like to show that to you. Now, it's very brief. It's not meant to be comprehensive by any means. You could spend your whole life writing books about the history of money, but I thought you'd find these kind of interesting. So, so in chapter 11, remember we were looking at the forms of money that could be used and have been used, the functions of money that are required And where we left off was our discussion about how money is measured. How is the money supply measured? So we'll get back to that in a minute. But first, let's have some fun with my little presentation here, which I'm calling Unusual Forms of Money. So for each one, we have to stop and think, do these forms satisfy all the requirements for money? Do they, for example, act as a medium of exchange, store of account, or unit of value? They need all three to be a proper form of money. Now, we already know, we'll discuss more of this later on, that of course, for many centuries, gold and silver were the form of money used by most countries. But there's been other cases where this was not true. And of course, at this point in time, primarily paper money circulates as money not backed by gold or silver. And of course, we all know about the stone money of Yap, maybe the most interesting form of money in the world. But anyway, so let's look at this. So we're going to start by noting that humanity has, of course, over the centuries, used many different forms of money. And just to give you a sense of where we're going with this, I have a picture of some of them. Now, the upper right-hand corner, you recognize this is the stone money of Yap. On the left, we have what are called wampum beads made by American Indians. Down here, we have seashells. And down here, of course, we have packs of cigarettes, which apparently unopened packs of cigarettes circulated as a form of money among the soldiers in World War II. Because, you know, the army gave them cigarettes, but not everybody smoked. So they could often trade their cigarettes, the soldiers who didn't smoke, to other soldiers for other goods that they really wanted. Anyway, here's some more. This is actual notes and coins. You may recognize these down here as euro notes. Upper right-hand corner, I think these are Greek coins. I have to go back and double check that. And the one on the left comes from the country of Ghana, which you can see has the seashell on it. So these are just some quick examples, but let's go through a few of the more interesting ones. For example, seashells. These are actually known as cowrie shells. Now, imagine this is the form of money used on your country. Let's say you live in a little island and this is the form of money. What would be one of the biggest things you'd worry about using this as a form of money? What problem might this represent?
There's not a stable supply. You could go get more.
Right. You could go down to the beach and get more. So what problem could that potentially cause? Inflation. That's right. Imagine people went out on the beach and dug up a lot more shells. Before you know it, the money supply is growing like crazy and you have inflation on your hands. Also, I have to assume that these are somewhat breakable. You might actually break your money if you're not careful with it. So this was used in Africa, Australia, and Asia throughout the 19th century and earlier in China and India. Now, this next one is hard to see from the picture. This is a brick of tea. It's been squeezed together very tightly with this pattern on it. And these have been used as a form of money as well. And you can imagine this might not be the best choice. It could potentially spoil, it could break. It might be awkward to carry it. But in countries where tea grows very well, it has been used as a form of money. China, Tibet, Mongolia, and Central Asia during the 19th century. Okay, you can see not ideal though. Now look at this one. This only lasted for about a year. Bottle caps. This was used in Cameroon in 2005. I guess it was an experiment that didn't work because you can see the same problem arises. You could easily create more of these or come up with them by drinking a lot of beer. Okay, so but sometimes countries run into trouble. They run out of gold and silver or other metals they need to make coins. You know, Cameroon is not a terribly wealthy country. It's possible that they simply ran out of the materials they needed to produce actual notes and coins. Now, here's a cool one. Look at this. This is in Somalia. These are guitars. They're actually coins. You can actually spend these. Wow. Now, that's about as cool as it gets. I think you'll agree. Imagine reaching into your pocket for some change and you come up with these guitars. Now, having said that, these are really not meant for public circulation. These are commemorative coins. And you know that the United States also makes a lot of commemorative coins. Mostly they come from the San Francisco Mint. They make a lot of gold coins in this day and age that were never meant to be circulated, that their value comes from their collectability more than the number on the front. Let's see. Yeah, and some of these are reproductions of actual earlier US coins. Let's see, like this one, $290. This was never circulated. It probably says $1 on it somewhere, but this is a commemorative only coin. It's only meant to be reflective of some event or other, typically, or this one was made at West Point. Okay, all these gold coins either come from West Point or the San Francisco Mint. So you never know. They make all kinds of stuff, but people who buy these are collectors. They're not going to take them out and spend them. That's for sure. Like, look at this one. It's got pictures of inventions. How cool is that? Now, technically, they're all $1 coins, but nobody's going to spend these. All right. Anyway, religious coins. Look at this. This coin circulated in Palau in 2007, and it's silver, and this is holy water in this little tube here. That's pretty different. You don't see that very often. Tubes of water in your coins. That's kind of unusual. Squirrel pelts. Now, what kind of country would tend to have squirrel pelts as its form of money? What kind of conditions are they living under, do you think?
Poverty.
Poverty, but what about the weather? What kind of country would this be? Something you'd see in Hawaii or maybe Alaska?
Squirrel seems a bit small.
They are kind of small.
I don't see how that would be useful, really, but maybe for like a hat.
That's true. No, they have been used to make fur coats and hats throughout history, but this would tend to be a cold country where there's no alternatives. So they end up trading pelts with each other for goods and services. So this would be Russia during the Middle Ages. They used squirrel pelts for a while because, it took a lot of work to capture the squirrels and do all of this to them. And so they had a value, especially because, like you said, they could be turned into hats and coats and stuff. So they were used as a form of money. Now look at this one. It's made out of wood. This is actually a piece of wood. And you can see all these German words on here. When do you suppose this one was being used?
It was in the inflation because they used all sorts of materials. Like they made iron coins too, actually, which actually get rusty over time and stuff. They use a lot of weird materials.
Yes, because
there was extreme inflation. They were trying to make it as fast as they could. So they used whatever they could get their hands on.
Right. Yes, this is the German hyperinflation. And so they're so desperate for something to use for money, like you said, that they're actually reduced to using wood. And you can imagine this could cause all kinds of problems. And that's because the currency, the official currency, was worthless. Became worthless very, very quickly. And these are coins from Africa. There's just these metal rods. And you can imagine these are going to be hard to carry around. And not only that, but apparently if one of the ends snaps off, it loses a lot of its value. So this must have been awkward. These were used in Africa until the 20th century. I guess they felt like they were very strong and all, but man, how'd you like to carry these to the store? And then imagine what kind of change you'd be getting back. Now look at this one. That little tiny thing to the left of the dime is a quarter tara. That coin actually circulated in India. It's silver. It was issued between the 14th and 16th century. It is the smallest coin known in history. What would be the biggest issue with having a coin of that size, do you think?
Losing it.
I'd lose it.
Yes, they're easy to lose. In fact, we had the same thing in the United States in the 19th century. For a few years. Let me just show you this thing to you. We briefly had a 3-cent coin that was made out of silver. And so it's hard to see from here, but it was really, really small. Even in those days, 3 cents did not represent a whole lot of silver. So people kept losing them. Not only that, oh, by the way, what's interesting is that a 3-cent coin, the actual formal name is a trime. Look at that. It's not a dime, it's a trime. And so these circulated during the right around the Civil War. So in order to dance around this little problem with losing them, at some point the government switched them over to nickel. Okay, and that really took care of the problem because, you know, nickel obviously is worth a lot less than, here's a nickel one. A lot less than silver, that's for sure. Not only that, but look at this thing. It's only worth $24. This was issued right after the Civil War, and it's only worth $24. Oh my God. And you can see it's gotten pretty worn out. But still, it's a piece of history. And so, yes, that was the reason why they were discontinued. The silver ones, they were replaced with nickel because people were losing them. And then eventually they stopped making them altogether. You know, 3 cents is kind of a peculiar amount. And so I guess they weren't terribly popular. But remember too, in this day and age, I mean, during the Civil War, 3 cents was probably worth the equivalent of at least 25 cents now. So it wasn't like a ridiculous amount of money. But yeah, Noah, go ahead.
I just wanted to say the reason it's so cheap is, as you see, it says circulated, so it's probably in much, much worse condition than that picture. It's basically a trick. Circulated means like it's barely readable, they can barely see any details on it. So that it's gonna be in much worse condition than the picture.
It might be. These
I
are
know
just
from
examples.
experience.
Okay. Yeah, that's probably if we found one that was in better
Definition of
condition.
circulated is like the details are very hard to read, and so it basically means it's been in circulation for a long time. So the pictures are in much better condition than it probably would be. If you look up a circulated coin where you get the exact one in the picture, it'll be in much worse condition.
That's probably true. Yeah. Well, they got all kinds of stuff here. I never realized that Amazon dealt with coins and notes. I guess I should have figured they would. Anyway, so then we have salt. Now, here's an interesting side note. During the days of the Roman Empire, salt was extremely valuable because it was hard to find it and hard to make it. In other words, but yet people need salt in their diets. Also at that time, with no refrigeration, salt was being used to help preserve foods and keep them from spoiling. So salt was extremely valuable. In fact, so much so that the Roman soldiers were given their salaries in the form of salt rather than coins. And so the word salary is actually derived from the Latin word for salt, because they were paid in salt instead of coins. And the soldiers wanted the salt instead of the coins because it was worth so much money. At that time, of course, this is when it's hard. Even now, manufacturing salt isn't easy, but it's not horribly expensive either. And you can tell by how much it costs to buy salt in the store. But at this point in time, it was much, much more difficult. And of course, it was used for a lot more purposes than just making the food taste good. And then here's our favorite, the old stone money of Yap makes another appearance here. And you can see they just leave them laying around the island. Nobody ever tries to move them. And they're just part of the landscape, I guess. And of course, we know the story of Yap already, so we don't need to dwell on that. Now, I've also come up with some interesting examples of our own currency. And for example, did I ask you this question the other day? There was only one woman who ever has appeared on a US paper note. I don't remember if I did or I didn't.
Yeah, you did. Martha Washington.
Oh, all right. Well, the surprise is spoiled a little, but that's okay.
How about that?
But I do have a picture of it. Now, look at this. This is 1777. This is paper money in the United States. Remember, we don't have any silver or gold. We're using Spanish silver dollars, and it's still not enough. So printers are making these little paper, they look like little stamps, but you can see the biggest issue they had as you can probably guess, is counterfeiting. And so what does it say on there? Can you read that? Is that big enough yet?
Yeah.
What does it say? To counterfeit is death. Literally, it was such a big problem that it actually was punishable by death if you were caught counterfeiting paper money. That's how easy it was for people to counterfeit the money, because the printing technology was still in its infancy. So that was a real problem. But what else were they supposed to do? So, by the way, at some point when the money got a little more under control, the counterfeit is death thing was replaced by in God we trust. Okay, you notice the switchover somewhere along the way. Our coins don't say that anymore. To counterfeit is death. Instead, they have the much nicer in God we trust. Now, look at this. Now, did I show you this yesterday, the other day, the $100,000 gold certificate? Well, there it is. That's the largest note ever issued by the United States. This one was convertible into gold. As you can see, it's a gold certificate. By the way, whose picture is that? Does anyone know? Oh, that's right. It's on top. Oh, sorry about that. But yes, that's Woodrow Wilson. And, he got to be on the $100,000 bill. And so there it is. On the other hand, oh, here we go. Here's a silver certificate. And there's Martha Washington. It says right on it, $1 silver. You could take it to any bank and they would be required to give you a silver dollar in exchange for this dollar bill. Okay, so the money was literally backed by silver and gold at that point in time. Nice.
On the larger silver certificates, there was it a floating exchange, right? Those rates were like set. So like holding on to, it wasn't a form of speculation. Like if you held on to it for 3 months, you'd still get the same amount if you got it now, right?
That's true. It was a fixed amount of silver, but the silver value could go up, but the amount of silver you were entitled to receive was the same. That's correct. All right, now look at this. I think we saw this the other day too. The 3-cent note, that's as small as it got. This was printed during the Civil War when there was no silver or gold or any other metals. There was all being used for the war effort. So notes they were called fractional notes, and they were circulated to obviously provide money that people needed to carry out daily transactions, but for which there just wasn't enough metal to print coins. So that's as low as it got, 3 cents. That's right. So we did have these periods where metal wasn't available for notes and for coins rather, and so we had to resort to this type of thing. Now, here's an interesting coin. This is the largest coin ever minted in the United States. This is a $20 gold coin. It looks like it says, what is that, 1903 there? Yes, this was often called a double eagle. The $10 coin was called an eagle. The $5 gold coin was called a half eagle. And the $2.50 gold coin was called a quarter eagle. Okay. This coin, by the way, a contest of some kind was held to decide on the most beautiful coin ever minted by the United States. And this coin is the winner. Well, you can kind of see why. That's an impressive looking coin. But if you wanted one of these for yourself, let's go back here. I bet we're looking at minimum $20,000 for this. Let's see if they have one. This is St. Gaudens, $20. Oh, it says see all buying options. What does that mean? Oh, this one's only $3,000. Well, that surprises me to no end. Huh. I'm surprised this could be, because I would have expected it to be more than that. Man, I guess it depends, of course, what condition it's in and what year it is. Nice. That one's 71. Okay. Yeah, I guess it's just like anything else. It depends on what year it came from. All right. Anyway, now that's the largest. What do you think the smallest U.S. coin was in our history? Was it 1 cent? No, otherwise I wouldn't have asked, would I? What do you think it turned out to be?
The dime?
No. There's a coin that's smaller than a penny that we've had in our history, and it was, there it is. Let's look at it. It's a half a cent. We've had half-cent coins in our history. Now, we don't need them anymore. I mean, come on, what would you buy with a half-cent coin? But at this point in time, they were worth a fair amount of money. I looked it up once. I think it was about 15 cents, the equivalent of 15 cents today. A half a cent in 1847 would have been worth roughly 15 cents today. So, you know, of course, why would you not want a coin of that size? Because you do need to make change. Now, here's an interesting side note. Has anyone been to Canada recently? Why do I ask? Because they got rid of their penny. In Canada, the smallest coin they have now is a nickel. So what happens if your change is $8.12? What do they do then, do you think?
I would assume that the vendor rounds up.
They do. Well, they can't. No, it's either up or down. They will round it down, like $8.12. They would round it down to $8.10. $8.13 or 14 cents. They would round it up to $8.15. So they only did this. They've done this within the last 10 years. So the last time I was there, I asked somebody in one of the stores, like, "Isn't this a headache?" And they said, "Yeah, you get used to it." But they felt like, you know what, we're wasting a lot of money minting pennies. Why do we need pennies? Let's just knock it off, and now we'll just round all the prices. Well, I don't think that'll ever happen here. I think it's too much of a nuisance, and people won't stand for it. So, but in Canada, they did it. And in fact, if you notice, a lot of countries don't even have a $1 bill anymore. It's all coins. Canada has a $1 coin, and they have a $2 coin. The smallest denomination paper money up there is 5. Okay, we still have the 1, and we're going to keep it, even though it costs a lot of money to print them. I don't think anyone wants to give up on those $1 bills.
There's a coin shortage anyway.
Yeah, I know. I'd say that we'll probably keep sticking with what we have for the foreseeable future. But other countries, they've done it. Nobody seemed to care. So, but I don't know. That must have been a tough sell to say we're getting rid of the penny because of all that annoying rounding that people have to do now. So anyway, so all right. Well, oh, look how late it got. So this was fun. But what we need to do next week is carry on with chapter 11. Now, where we left off here was we were about to discuss how to measure the money supply. And then we're going to actually start looking at the Federal Reserve System itself. That's going to be a huge topic. So we'll save all that good stuff for next Monday. But in the meantime, I will be posting the second sample midterm as soon as possible. So what you should do is work on the chapter 9 problem set and the second sample midterm so that we can go over them on Monday. All right. How does that sound? Pretty cool, huh?
Excellent.
All right.
Have a great weekend.
All right. You too. All right. Bye, everyone.